Before I introduce curves and creating and editing curves, I want to just show you some of the properties of the viewport and the grid by going to Windows, Settings, Preferences, and Preferences. This is how you can access and change different settings within Maya, should you need to. So if I go to Settings then, so again, it's Settings, Preferences, Preferences, and then Settings, you can see what unit measurements my grid is made up of here. So I'm working in centimeters. This is the default, and each unit here is 1 centimeter. So when you see I have a scale of 1 in real world space, I'm dealing with like an object that is 1 centimeter. Now, this is not something that is so important when it comes to animation, but it is important when it comes to more advanced processes like rapid prototyping, 3D printing, or using dynamics and in Maya. So just so you know, that's under the settings here. We also can manipulate things like what UI elements I have visible, like to get rid of or disable or enable the shelf, for example, or the time slider. So if you're missing any of the windows in your viewport or in your interface, you can come to the UI elements of the interface and check on or off. Here's all of the different options that we have. I think that's it for here for now. Under display, view axis, you can turn on and off this. Okay, so again, these preferences are here for you to make sure your interface is laid out the correct way, make sure you have the right tools available to you, and then to also change your settings as you need to. So I'm going to go ahead and create some curves, and curves aren't necessarily they're not renderable objects themselves. They're vectors positioned within the virtual space. They're a vector path positioned in virtual space. And so we're able to animate things along them, and we're also able to generate forms, surface forms from curves. So they're very handy. The first one I'll create here is a circle. And you can see here that this circle has a radius of 1 centimeter or 1 unit, right? And it says it here in the channel box editor. Also, if I open my outliner here, I see I have my NURB circle object is appearing in my outliner. And so I'm able to select it within my outliner, or I'm able to select it in the viewport. When curves are generated, they're generated based off of the grid, or kind of you use an orthographic view in order to be able to generate them. What I mean to say is if I can't just free form a curve in space, it has to be kind of like laid out within one of the axes grids. And to do that, I would go to panel orthographic view, front, for example, and I can lay out a curve here. So to start off, curves are always going to want to be kind of flat against the grid or against the world space within an axis with respect to a particular axis, kind of the grid of a particular axis. Let me go back to my perspective view here. If I go to my attribute editor, I have quite a few less tabs than I did when I made that polygon primitive. That's because NURBS curves have just less information. We're not rendering these, so we don't need a lot of the different tabs or what are called nodes. So I have here again, this first one, NURBS circle, is just going to give me my global transform information, telling me where it is, what direction it's rotated in, and what's its scale. And then I have the NURBS shape and some information here. Okay, so for this particular curve, I'm able, because it's kind of a primitive curve object, there's this make NURBS circle node that's popped up here. And so I'm able to change the radius of the circle here without changing its scale. right? Scale remains the same, but I'm changing its radius, how many sections it has, etc. So in order to see, for example, how many sections this circle has, I'm going to have to get into its component views, its component mode. And so to do that, I'm going to want to right click on my object, and you'll see this is why, you know, a 3-button mouse is really valuable, because I need to be able to access the components of this object, not just the object itself. So the components, I have object mode here, but then the components of this are going to be its curve points and its edit points. So if I go to its edit points here, now I'm in the edit point component mode, and now I can see that there are 8 edit points that are making up this particular circle. So what I can do is I can manipulate these points in order to manipulate the circle shape, and I can use my move tool, for example, to change the shape of this circle and move these edit points, and this will change the shape of the curve. Let me go back to my object mode here. You know, I'm also able to move, rotate, and scale using those transform tools as well. Once I start to scale, then the scale of this is starting to increase. Another thing I just wanted to mention is, let's say we are off far away in our scene and we want to get back to our grid. It's hard to kind of find it here. An easy way to navigate to particular objects is to highlight them in the outliner and then hit the hotkey F, and that will frame up that particular object within our viewport. I'm going to delete that object, and now I'm going to draw a freeform curve. So I can do that here on my shelf, my curve shelf. This little pencil tool allows me to just freeform draw a curve. And again, I'm not freely drawing it in space. It's always going to be in relation to the grid. Okay, so here's my freeform curve, but this also has the same components. If I right click again, I have my edit points. There's also this other option, which are curve points, or sorry, excuse me, control vertex points. And these kind of show you the connection between those edit points. So they're just another way to manipulate the shape. So they're control vertex points. So, you know, if this was a polygon model, we would have these, this shape would you know, maybe be connected by these control vertex points. And then we could generate a kind of smoothness based off of them. So they are in between edit points, and they allow us to control the curve as well. Go back to my edit point tool. You can see there, my control vertex point that's still highlighted is kind of controlling this bridge of edit points. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And another way to draw curves, and let me go to, rather than working in perspective view, I like to work in an orthographic view to draw my curves initially, so I have better control over them. So rather than drawing directly on the grid, let's draw from a front view, you know, and I'm going to go ahead. And now this gives me a kind of different grid that's in the Y and X axes. So along, so the kind of grid is placed in the Z. And so I'm going to draw this grid in the Y and the X. Or draw this curve. And so I'm going to select this EP curve tool here, which is the edit point curve tool. And this allows me to drop points on my, with a little bit more, with relation to the grid, you know, I'm able to drop edit points with a little bit more specificity. And once I'm done drawing my curve, I'm going to hit return, and that will give me my curve as an object here. So now if I go back to my panel's perspective view, right, you can see that this curve has been drawn along in relation to the Y and the X axes, and kind of like on the Z grid. So I can rotate this, you know, back I can rotate this or scale or move it. And I also, if I want to, change its orientation, and then I can also go ahead and work with the edit points in order to be able to manipulate this curve further. There's a couple other ways to generate curves. That's an EP curve. I can also, there's arcs, and then there's some curve editing tools here. But this very last one, which you might be recognized from Illustrator if you've used Bezier curves, this is kind of intuitive, maybe more intuitive for you, those of you who work with Illustrator, but you're going to be creating Bezier curves using those curve handles. But we don't have edit points here now. Instead I still have control vertex points, and these control vertex points are now those Bezier handles.